So not only are we gaining character as we grow towards the first initiation, but our underlying value in doing that, what is our basic motivation, is moving fundamentally in a more spiritual direction. So what the first initiation can be said to reflect then is a deep incarnation in our physical bodies, in our physical consciousness, of a reorientation in our values towards spirit, towards awakening, towards love and kindness. Whatever our, people do differ in how they conceive of spirituality, but some basic reorientation around spiritual values is happening, and it's taking root in our physical lives enough that it's starting to kind of get the upper hand and we as incarnate people really are longing for spiritual development, aspiring to awakening, aspiring to love, and that's becoming the dominant theme. We have a lot of work to do, even after passing through the first initiation. But we've kind of tipped over, especially with regard to our behavior. We've kind of redesigned our lives around implementing spiritual values. So it's not uncommon to establish a meditation practice. One of the ways we can look at the initiations is, especially in the ascending model, is with corresponding bodies. So this is the physical body, and the corresponding ray that goes with that, which is the seventh ray. So it's the earth element, physical body, physical plane, behavior and action, and the corresponding ray is the seventh ray. And so the seventh ray kind of means what facet of our soul that's particularly relevant to the physical body is being developed at this time. And it means things like kind of reorganizing our values and reorganizing our lives so that we build into the schedule of our lives new behaviors, like reading about spirituality, setting aside some time for meditation. Maybe we engage in something like Hatha Yoga or Tai Chi, time to connect to other people. Maybe there's ways that we connect to teachings, to a community. Now, all of these pieces aren't necessarily a part of a given, but they're common pieces. And so as our lives kind of transform and a new kind of order or organization pattern is emerging in our physical lives, it sort of lays a foundation, a structure that expresses our new values. And this is actually changing like the energy in our bodies, changing our both our dense physical bodies and our subtle bodies are changing, energy shifting. And changes we might even go through some processes of purification where old karma now is being stirred up, because this is soul energy grounding in our bodies. It's going to stir things up. Healings need to take place. Old karma needs to be burned off, because these are old tendencies and issues and patterns that we have. So as we make that transition, we implement these changes. Transformation, purification. We might even have like a healing crisis, a classic kind of shamanic traditions, for instance. There's strong awareness that often as the shaman goes through an initiation and a reorientation, they might become ill because there's a fever and a healing crisis takes place. And this is part of the whole process. These are the acute phases sometimes. The process in general is stretched out over longer periods of time. In fact, many people, it can take lifetimes of kind of warming up to the first initiation, where they get closer to it and make some progress and work through karma, learn lessons, and then maybe in another life they're back into a more worldly mode, maybe with some deeper character qualities. And then the next life they go more consciously, they're drawn back into an even deeper approach till they break through. Once having broken through the first initiation, often people are a little more anchored. That's why the Buddha used the term stream entry when he named the first initiation. And by that he meant you've entered the stream to self-realization, to nirvana. And in a sense, there's no going back. You've started this thing in motion. You might forget in some subsequent lives temporarily, but a process of fire is lit in your nature, in your being, that's burning now, that's setting in motion this process. And it just has its own momentum. It's going to keep going. You can slow it down or speed it up, but it's gonna take place. So that's one of the things that's so profoundly significant about the first initiation, is it's a turning point where a shift has taken place in the inner reality of each being that goes through this process, where something in their soul is awakened. Because the soul, even the soul of a human being, that inner part of you that goes from life to life, is yearning for a new level of awakening. It's yearning for God consciousness. It's a type of God consciousness that it's never tasted before. It's had the God consciousness, for instance, that archangels enjoy, but there's an even deeper type, transcendent, non-dual realization, which is even more radically transcends anything that we can put into words or conceptualize. It's the deepest level of freedom, the most complete sense of returning to the truth, awakening to the true nature of things. And at the first initiation, our inner being will have its first glimpse of that state. It will have a fundamental awakening to this radical transcendent reality. Call it Brahman, the Tao. That even our archangelic nature, all of us have actually had aspects of our nature have participated in other ways of being before we became human, and may have even been involved in gaining a certain amount of spiritual development. But never before have we had that taste of radical nirvana, radical self-realization, radical God consciousness. It's a new dimension of God consciousness. And that lights a fire in our soul. Now, sometimes that experience actually bleeds through into the personality. Sometimes the personality will actually participate at the first, at that moment of transition, will have that experience. In Zen, it's called Satori, or in Theravada, the old school Buddhism, it's called the path moment, and they call it that because it means you've now entered that path. This a direct, intuitive immersion in the realization of absolute truth as awakened in your soul, and now you've entered that final stage of the path to mastery, to deep self-realization. But it really depends on the path that a person's on, whether or not their incarnate self will actually participate in that experience. So, for instance, if you happen to be on a path where you're meditating a lot, so that your personality has the opportunity to enter a state, let's say if you're in a retreat mode, you go off into a monastery in ancient Egypt or something, and you decide to meditate for 3 months for 10 hours a day. In that state, even as a pre-first degree initiate, as you're working up to that first initiation, you can temporarily enter into states that are very quiet, very deep, very reflective. And in that context, your personality has come into temporary harmony enough with your soul that when your soul has that moment of momentary direct realization of God in this new and deeper way, the personality will be flooded with that realization at the same time. So that can happen. And not just in retreat, although probably more often than not. Since this kind of approach has been deeply explored in ancient traditions like Zen and Chan Buddhism in China and Tibetan, and just to use those traditions, or in other traditions like in India and the Sikhs and many traditions around the world, in the Middle East and in other places as well, have explored the use of very sort of retreat mode meditation. And so one of the wisdoms that's come from that is a recognition that that profound experience, to really participate in that as an incarnate personality, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be in a retreat context that'll happen. Now, luckily, for many of us who aren't as inclined to intensive retreat practice, which is fine, the first initiation is still fully accessible and will be experienced in other aspects as well. It's not necessary to have that radical moment of self-realization. And it only lasts for a moment. It tends to change a person, though. It tends to be in the kind of thing where even though that experience of God consciousness only lasts at the first initiation for a moment, even to the soul, the person's shifted after that. The way they say it in the Sufi tradition is that you've passed through the first station of the soul, and you're forever now at that station. You can't, your outer personality can kind of lose touch with that, certainly, especially in subsequent incarnation. But inwardly, it's like you're a different kind of being after that. Something's changed in your soul. You saw a truth that has an impact on you, and you'll never be the same after that. And even though the personality may not have participated in that realization at that moment, the implications of that change will gradually filter into the personality, and the person will be different.